So that's what the Armenian working class looks like in our community. I want to focus on the taxi workers for a couple of reasons. First, that's where I've done a lot of my work, and that's where I've interacted with a lot of the Armenian working class. Going in and talking to them and interacting with them at the holding lot, I think has been the most valuable way to really get insight into a part of the community that we don't really see very often. Membership-based organization, it's not an official union, it doesn't have bargaining power with the taxi companies, but it was actually created as a result of the UCLA Labor Center and a couple of community organizations in downtown, such as the South Asian Network, the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, and some cab drivers that wanted to stand up for the injustices that were happening. So in 2006, UCLA funded and commissioned a study through the Institute of Industrial Relations, and it was a 100-page document that came out, and it really spelled out for the first time quantitatively what was wrong and what was going on in the Los Angeles taxi working system. So let me give you some facts. First of all, taxis are actually a public utility. It's not a private enterprise. It's a public utility like the bus or the pathetic subway system we have in LA. It's supposed to be regulated by the city just like any of those other public utilities. There's over 5,000 taxi drivers today in LA. 20% are Armenian, and they're the largest ethnic groups, as I said. Currently, taxi cab drivers aren't considered employees of the company. They're considered independent contractors, and that's where a lot of the problem comes in, because they're stuck between the city and the companies, and really get the worst of both situations. And within the force, there's a tiered system. So there's lease drivers and there's owner-operators, which makes a really big difference. Lease drivers are obviously ones that don't own vehicles, and they lease it either from the taxi companies or from other drivers, because a driver can only work so many hours, but a car can run for a lot more than that. The average hours per week for taxi drivers is about 72 hours a week. And there's a high rate of health problems, especially with problems related to long hours of driving, back and neck problems that have been reported. 1 in 3 taxi workers have been subjugated to racial and other hostile comments by their customers. 25% have been physically harmed or been threatened to be physically harmed. And the average pay rate is actually $8.39 an hour. Once you factor everything in, and that includes overtime pay, because like I said, 72 hours a week. There's no health insurance because they're considered independent contractors. They get their own health. They're supposed to get their own health insurance. And here's a really big thing that keeps them down every month. Taxi drivers every month start in the red. So unlike any other employee public service employee that would go and work, get their monthly, paycheck, call it a day, taxi workers, if they're a lease driver, they have to make $2,000 a month before they start making money on their own. And a lot of that goes to leasing the car, paying the dues to the companies, paying for liability insurance, paying for gas. They pay for gas. Up until very recently, they paid for the credit card surcharges. If you're an owner-operator, it's not much better. It's $1,300 a month you have to work off before you're able to start making money. So, yeah, as you can tell, it's not a pretty situation. So why is it like this? Up until the 70s, LA had the yellow cab system, just like they have in New York, where it was one company, it was a private company, franchised by the state, by the city. The workers were employees of that company. They were represented by the Teamsters, and the city regulated it properly, and it did its thing. And in the mid-70s, there was a big scandal with the leadership of Yellow Cab, where essentially the company fell apart. And between the 70s and 90s, there was a complete transformation of the LA taxi working system. So by the 90s, the Rouse family actually had established numerous other taxi companies and spent millions of dollars lobbying the City Hall so that in 2000, when the franchises were up for renewal, they were able to get a large portion of them and were not regulated the way they have been in the past, which is why we have the current independent contractor system instead of a normal employee system like any other public utility would. So the way the system is regulated right now, there's no elected official that regulates. There's no consultation with workers. They're unresponsive to workers' needs. There's 3 sources of regulation: the LAPD, which harasses taxi workers a lot; the Taxi Cab Commission, which is part of the Department of Transportation, bureaucrats essentially, and an authorized taxi cab supervision, which is actually not part of government at all and is part of a collective of the companies that regulate them outside of the jurisdiction of the city. So they regulate things like what they can wear, where they can use the restroom, and they have to have very detailed records of every single fare. But those same regulators also don't go after the companies. They accept general business plans. They don't go after bandit cops and limo services, which is one of the biggest sources of lost revenue by the taxi cabs. So the situation there is that there's taxi cabs that don't have the official medallions, that aren't officially allowed to be taxi cabs, but they do it anyway. And there's the limo services, or the town cars, which by law are supposed to only pick up people that they've arranged for, but it's common practice to bribe people, doorsmen at hotels and other people to get them services. So they cut into the taxi company's service as well. And there's a really flawed index for establishing what the rate is for taxi workers, because it doesn't take into account the rising cost of fuel or other surcharges. The credit card surcharges up until very recently weren't taken into account. So that's what leads, that index is actually what has led to the $8.39 an hour average pay for the taxi cab workers. So, like I said, I've been working with LATWA, Los Angeles Taxi Workers Alliance, and they started organizing a campaign. So in 2010, when these franchises are up for renegotiation and reevaluation, there can be a complete overhaul of the system. They have campaigns in improving the holding lot at LAX, which is one of the main sources of gathering for the taxi workers. The dress codes, a lot of the inspectors come after dress codes, and that's been a very big campaign. Meter increases to help pay for better wages, essentially. Opening the books of the companies, which are very secretive and the workers don't have any access to, even though it's supposed to be part of a public utility. And they've also organized direct actions against the harassment of the companies and the regulators. Just last month at City Hall, there was a pretty big demonstration. I don't know if any of you saw it or read about it in the LA Times, but about 200 taxi cabs were circling around LA City Hall. It was pretty cool. So in 2010, we're going to work with LATWA to try to overturn these franchises and get better regulatory systems for the taxi cab workers so that their current situation can improve. What can we do? As Americans, we can call City Hall and make sure that this is brought to the attention of our City Hall representatives, because right now all they really hear from are the taxi cab companies and a little bit of noise from the unions. As Armenians, we can actually work within our Armenian organizations to advocate on behalf of the taxi workers, on behalf of the Armenian taxi workers, and to fight for their needs, and to really stand in solidarity with them. So with that, thank you.